You know, I think there's a place in our industry and in our collecting habits for emulation machines, because sometimes you just don't have the space to collect retro games. Or you don't have the money because, let's face it, stuff's expensive. Enter stuff like this. The Super Console X Pro. This claims to play 60,000 games out of the box. So what do you say? Let's go take a look. Alright, so here we have the Super Console X Pro. Has powerful performance and claims to smoothly run 80 plus emulators. Now, the box is nothing too terribly special. Here's the ports that it has. It's got an SD card, 2 USB ports, an AV, Ethernet, HDMI, DC in, and a power button. The box includes the Super Console, the SD card, a game controller, an HDMI cable, and a power adapter. So, let's pop this guy open. Let's find out what's inside. Let's see how things look. Here's our power adapter, HDMI cord, a USB 2.0 hub for 4 controllers, it looks like. A remote, which makes me think this is probably going to be running Android TV. And to quote Yoda, size matters not. Here's our cute little console. This is the Super Console X Pro. I do like that it's got feet on the bottom, rubberized feet. That's pretty nice. Here's the paperwork that comes with it. And you get, oh boy, a couple of generic PS2 controllers, or I guess possibly thought of as PS3. Oh man, these are... Yeah, I'm hoping this thing works with other USB controllers. But what's in the box isn't nearly as important as how it plays out of the box. So let's get this over to the TV, we'll capture some footage, and we will see how it works. So booting this thing up, I was actually pretty excited because there was like this huge animated intro and I was really into it. I thought it was really cool. And then, yeah, the rug got pulled out from underneath me because I had plugged in my wired Xbox 360 controller that I use for almost all of my emulation services, and it didn't work. I had to use the god-awful PS2 controller that shipped with this thing. So we got that plugged in, and we went through it. Now, this is the list of emulators that it has. This is straight out of the box. I have not added anything to this. Here's the list of what consoles you can play on this device. The Amiga 1200, the Amstrad CPC, Arcade, just kind of generic arcade, the Atari 2600, 5200, 7800, and 800, the Lynx, the Atari ST, the Atomiswave, Commodore 64, Dreamcast, Final Burn Neo, Famicom Disk System, Game & Watch, Game Gear, Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color, Genesis, Intellivision, MAME, the Master System, the Mega Drive Japan, MSX2, N64, Naomi, Nintendo DS, Neo-Geo CD, standard Neo-Geo, the NES, some NES hacks, Neo-Geo Pocket Color, the Odyssey 2, a really neat thing called Open Beats of Rage, the PC Engine CD, just generic ports, PSP, PlayStation, 32X, Sega CD, the SG-1000, Super Nintendo, Super Grafx, Vectrex, Virtual Boy, WonderSwan Color, the X68000 from Sharp, and the ZX Spectrum. These are all the things it says you can play out of the box. There's mixed results, but what it does is pretty impressive. All right, I'm going to start with computers because I think that's a great place to begin. And I didn't go through every single emulator on this machine, or I didn't record footage for every single emulator on this machine, but I did get quite a bit of stuff done. So first things first, I started with the Amiga. The Amiga was something I always wanted to own when I was a kid. A friend of mine owned one and I loved being able to play on it. And there's a really massive list of games on here for one. Like the Amiga has a ton of games listed. And the first thing that really caught my eye was Castlevania. I had no idea that there was a Castlevania port on the Amiga, and I played it, and while it's a little rough around the edges, like, it's most assuredly Castlevania. It looks really good, the sound is amazing, and the gameplay isn't bad. It's a little stilted in the animation department, but the actual gameplay is pretty good. And then I had to boot up what was my particular favorite Amiga game, and one of the games that just hooked me when I was young, and that was The Secret of Monkey Island. I loved Monkey Island growing up. It is one of my all-time favorite games, one of my absolute favorite series of games released, and to be able to play it on here was pretty good. It took me a little while to get used to what the controls were because obviously it's emulating a mouse on a controller, so there's definitely some learning curve there, but once I got the hang of it, I was down. It was really fun, it was really easy to move around and really easy to navigate, and I got to learn about Loom, so if you want to know more about Loom, ask me about Loom. I checked out 2 other computers as well. First and foremost, one of the ones I had to check out because I've never had the opportunity to play one before was the ZX Spectrum. And inspired by my friend Ginger Hippie Gaming, he has done some videos on a game called Chucky Egg. And I was like, you know what the hell, let's give it a shot. Now, I would like to say that I was blown away by the gameplay on this, but unfortunately I just couldn't figure out the controls. I needed to remap everything, but it booted up and it worked great. I was able to get in game, I was able to move my character around a little bit, and able to actually die repeatedly, but I was able to move left and right, and I'm going to remap things, and I'm going to keep playing it because I want to try more Spectrum games, because it's just such a legendary console, it's such a legendary microcomputer, it's something I definitely want to spend some more time with. The other one I tried was the Sharp 68000, and that just did not work. I booted up a game and it just immediately went to a black screen and never loaded. So sadly, that didn't work. I also was able to get into a C64 game. I don't remember which one it was off the top of my head because I didn't capture footage for it, but the C64 was my computer growing up, and that was one I wanted to check out, and it booted up and it worked. So that was a really nice feeling. So unfortunately, while the Sharp 68000 was a failure, every other microcomputer I tried was a success. Now, let's move on to classic consoles. If I'm talking about consoles, I want to go back as far as I can and start with something that I played when I was younger, and that would have been the Atari 2600. And while I didn't go back and play the first game I ever played on the Atari 2600, which was Atari Super Football, I did boot up Crystal Castles. Now, it's no surprise, the Atari 2600 runs flawlessly, the gameplay is great, it looks fantastic for what it is, and it's a faithful port of the arcade classic. Moving on now to the Atari 5200, I started off with Dig Dug, and one of my favorite games. It plays admirably well on the 5200. I still prefer the arcade original or the NES, but this one was just fine. On the 7800, I referred to one of the videos my friend the Immortal John Hancock has done, and he suggested in one of his videos to try Food Fight on the 7800, and I gotta be honest with you, this was really fun. I've never played this game before. This is the first time I've ever even looked at it, and I was really shocked with how much I enjoyed this. I played this a lot longer than I anticipated. I figured this is going to be like a 30-second boot up, grab some footage, get out, and go play something else. I actually ended up playing for about 15 or 20 minutes because I was having so much fun with it. For other classic consoles, one of the things I booted up immediately because I have never had the opportunity to play one was the Vectrex. And this is really neat because while the Vectrex only has 71 games offered on here, it's a mix of both retail releases and homebrews. I checked out Pole Position, which was one of my favorite Atari games when I was younger, and it was a lot of fun on the Vectrex. It looks really good, it plays brilliantly well, and it was really unique to kind of look at this with these vector graphics and try something a little bit different than what I was used to. I also tried out Star Trek the Motion Picture, and it's definitely a Star Trek game. You're certainly blowing up birds of prey and Romulan warbirds, which was pretty cool, and I'm assuming you're piloting the Enterprise because this is Star Trek the Motion Picture, but I don't know, it was really neat to try out a Vectrex for the first time and to enjoy it as much as I did. I'm going to say that's about it for classic consoles. I did the 3 Ataris and I did the Vectrex as far as like classic older console systems. There's other ones on here, obviously the Odyssey and the Intellivision come to mind, but I wanted to get onto the things that I grew up with, the things that I started with, and that is why we're hopping over next to the NES, the Master System, the SNES, and the Genesis. Much like what we saw with the classic consoles, everything in this particular section, for the most part, ran really well. On the NES, I tried out a game that I always wanted to play when I was younger, but never really had the opportunity just because I had kind of moved on to other consoles at the time, and that's Metal Storm. And this game is amazing. If you've never played this, you absolutely have to check it out. It's a fantastic mech fighter where you're able to kind of manipulate gravity and bounce from either the floor or the ceiling, and enemies will follow you, and you actually have to like line up shots and stuff like that. It's a really clever game and a lot of fun to play. I also checked out something that I will never be able to own because it's so expensive, and that's Power Blade 2. Now, Power Blade 2 is really wonderful. I loved the original Power Blade when I was younger. It's one that I wish I had hung on to just because it's so excellent. And it's just something that when I play this, it just really makes me wish that this was something that had kind of born a franchise. It's a very clever series of games and just looks fantastic and sounds wonderful and plays brilliantly well. I next bounced over to the Famicom Disk System because I really wanted to try out the Kinnikuman game for the Famicom Disk System, and I was really encouraged because as I booted it up, I got to the press start screen and I was really excited, and then it asked me to flip the disc, and that's where the wheels fell off. And hoping that this was just going to be an issue with Kinnikuman, I tried out the Famicom Disk System version of Zelda as well, and yeah, same result. I'm not going to say it doesn't work. I'm sure that there's a workaround here where I'm able to make the disc flip via some console commands or maybe using the controller to input it, but I don't know what that is. I need to do some more research. But right out of the box, I was failing at booting up Famicom Disk System games, which was a bummer. Moving on to the Master System, and I just recently acquired one within the last year, and I wanted to try out Hang On because that was one of the games I got with it, and
I love this game. I've never played it before. This was so much fun. It's a fantastic motorcycle racing game. It looks incredible. Like, it's hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that this is an 8-bit console sometimes because of how deep the color palette and how deep and detailed the games look. Because not only is Hang On a great game, the other game I tried out is one of my personal favorites that I played when I was younger, and that's The Lucky Dime Caper starring Donald Duck. This is one a friend of mine had growing up in Massachusetts. I guess he got it from family over in Europe, and I loved it. It's such a great game. The animations are wonderful, the graphics are spectacular, and it just plays so incredibly well. Moving on to the SNES, and I tried out one of the games that I have had suggested to me by Gary from Rock Solid Productions, and that is Back to the Future 2 on the Super Famicom, and this game just looks and sounds amazing. I don't know what's going on. I'm pretty sure it follows the plot of the movie, but I don't really know because there's a whole lot of people shooting guns at Marty McFly, and I don't remember that in the film. I also tried out Super Mario World, because if you're going to try out a Super Nintendo game, it should probably be the gold standard game to make sure that it's playing correctly, and played flawlessly. Sounded and looked great. As far as the Genesis goes, I booted up Streets of Rage 2, which is one of my all-time favorite games, and as far as beat-em-ups go, this is one of the best of all time, and I'm so happy to say that this emulates it perfectly. There are zero issues encountered. It sounds and plays brilliantly with no delays on controller input. It just is a wonderful experience. And then I hopped into NHL 95, which is one of my favorite sports games ever. It's a fantastic game, and it plays so well on this console. I am really, really stoked at how well this plays. But I think it's time to move things up a little bit. Let's start mixing in a little bit more complexity. I think it's time to bring in things that run off of discs, maybe some 64-bit consoles. So let's take a look at the Sega 32X, the Sega CD, the N64, the PlayStation, and the Dreamcast. You know what, I'm going to toss in the TurboGrafx CD as well, and the game I tried out there was Double Dragon 2, and this is such a really neat departure from what I'm used to on the NES. I've never actually played the arcade version of Double Dragon 2, so I don't know how that plays, but this is really a breath of fresh air. It's a beautiful game, fantastic animations, great sound, and it's really something that you would want from a disc-based beat-em-up on a 16-bit console. This is really cool. Like, I have very little exposure to the TurboGrafx, and I should have probably played something on it in the previous section, but here, we're getting the TurboGrafx CD now. Double Dragon 2 looks really good. But moving on to the Sega CD now, and the Sega CD, I had to play what is the game that I wanted to get so badly for the console, and I wanted more than anything else, which I picked up at Korg's a couple of months ago, and that is Sonic CD. This is such a beautiful game, and it sounds so good, and it runs flawlessly. Like, one of the things I was really concerned about having to use this really crappy knockoff DualShock 2 controller is that it was going to cause a lot of input delays and cause problems or just be uncomfortable to play these games with, but no, it actually plays really well, and it's pretty comfortable to hold in your hand. It definitely feels cheap, but from a gameplay perspective, it's really fine. On the 32X, I checked out a game I've never played before, and that's Knuckles Chaotix, and it's interesting. I need to do a little bit more time with it because I don't really know what's going on here. I just know that it's you play as Knuckles, and eventually you get someone that follows you around. I don't really know. After that, though, I hopped over to the N64. Now, this is one that I fully expected the wheels to come off on because N64 emulation is kind of a crapshoot, and all three games I played ran really well. First up was Buck Bumble, which is, if you've never played it, you need to, and at the very least, listen to the theme song because the music is amazing. I'm not going to play it here. You need to do a search for it here on YouTube and find it because it's fantastic. And this game is just great. Like, the controls work fantastically well. The game looks good. It controls perfectly. I had no complaints on this one. And then I tried out Castlevania from Konami, and I remember this game kind of getting crapped on a bit when it released, and I don't know why. Like, it's not, I mean, okay, I know why. It's not a great game, and it's a very far departure from normal Castlevania experiences, but this actually plays really well, and it doesn't look too bad. Now, is it exciting? Is it fun? No, it's not, but it plays okay. It actually controls fairly well. And then I hopped over to F-Zero on the N64, and this is one where I can look at how it plays on the Switch, how it plays on the original N64, and how it plays here on the Super Console X, and it's impressive. You don't feel any sense of speed being lost. It emulates beautifully well. It sounds wonderful. This was shocking how good this worked to me. Like, I did not expect this to work nearly as good as it does. After the N64, I bounced over to the PlayStation 1 and I checked out Darkstalkers 3 because this was going to be one of those kind of telltale things here. If I was feeling a lot of input delay, this would be a place where I would sense it. And I was really pleased to see that while there's definitely some input delay, it's not noticeable enough to me, at least, where it kind of kills the enjoyment of playing this game. It was still very fun to play. It was still really fun to check out. It still performed really well. I thought the graphics looked great and were up to par with what I was used to seeing on the PlayStation 1. Now, hopping over to the Dreamcast, that's where things are a little interesting. So, the Dreamcast emulation, like, the games run smoothly, but there's definitely some issues with the emulation here. Like, you can see here in Sonic Adventure, it just forgot to render Sonic's face in this cutscene, which was a little bit of nightmare fuel. And then when I hopped over to Marvel vs. Capcom 2, you can see here in the background, it's not correctly rendering things in the background. So the emulation on the Dreamcast, not great, but it's at least playable. I definitely don't think I'll be playing it again because I will say, when I was playing the Dreamcast, the system got really warm. Like, it was definitely being worked hard by emulating the Dreamcast games. So it's probably not something I'm going to do terribly often, or if I do, it will be from a cold boot to see if that helps improve things, but it at least runs, which is pretty impressive in the grand scheme of things. I want to move on now to a console that I never had the opportunity to play growing up, and that is the Neo-Geo and the Neo-Geo CD. This one had me really excited because the Neo-Geo was always that golden goose that I was never able to acquire as a kid. Now, the Neo-Geo itself, I tried out one of my favorite arcade games, and that's Baseball Stars, and this is the real deal. This is as advertised. This is so good and so much fun to play. It's a cartoon come to life, but they're baseball players. It's so well done. Now, if you've only played Baseball Stars on the NES, you're in for a treat here because everything is bigger, everything is more loud, everything is more bombastic. It's just such a lovely, wonderful game, and I was so excited to see this boot up because I've actually had some issues getting Neo-Geo to run on my PlayStation Classic or on my Raspberry Pi. So out of the box, this booting up and running flawlessly at first blush was amazing. I also tried out some stuff on the Neo-Geo CD, and the first thing I tried was Fatal Fury Real Bout Special, and I was really enjoying this. I've never played this one. This is one I've always wanted to try out, always one I wanted to see. And it was so nice to see this with these gigantic sprites, the way it's meant to be seen, the way it's meant to be viewed in its original form on the Neo Geo CD. It's just gorgeous. And then after that, I hopped on to King of Fighters 98, and it played perfectly. There was no input delays. There was no issues with the emulation. Everything ran beautifully well. And this was just so nice. It's so exciting to me to have these games at my disposal now, to be able to try these out. And yes, I understand it's emulation and physical forever. I am down with that, but I also don't have the ability to mortgage my house 3 times in order to be able to buy all these old games, you know what I mean? So having this on this device gives me the opportunity to play them. It's not the same thing as owning them. I understand that. I agree with that. I'm 100% down with what you're saying there, but it is something now that I at least have the opportunity to try out. Now, we've looked at home consoles, we've looked at classic consoles, we've looked at some more modern consoles, but how does this thing do with handhelds? We're going to start with the Game Boy, and we're going to work our way all the way up to the PSP. Handhelds work shockingly well for the most part. There is one particular handheld device that just looks terrible, and we'll get there. But starting off with the Game Boy, I ran Mario Land 2, 6 golden coins, and it's like, it plays wonderfully. It's exactly how you would expect it to look and perform. I will say that the screen is really small on this emulator. Like, it's got that bezel around the edges, and it just looks really small, but it also doesn't blow out the pixels, which I kind of appreciate. That is one of the things I don't like about my Raspberry Pi, is it puts everything out to its full screen capacity, and this one at least keeps it pixel perfect and everything looks good. On the Game Boy Color, I tried out WWF Betrayal, a fantastic little weird beat-em-up from the guys at Way Forward, and yeah, you get to play Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Triple H, run through and just beat up the bad guys and fight what looks to be, I think that's Mario as a referee, or is that Ron Jeremy? I don't know. Next, I went over to the Game Boy Advance and I checked out 3 of my favorites. The first up I checked was Lilo and Stitch, which just is such a wonderful run and gun game. If you've never played it, you really need to. It feels like a slightly easier version of Alien Hominid, and that's kind of fitting because, you know, Stitch is an alien. I also tried out Metal Slug Advance, which is another run and gun game, and it looks and plays beautifully on this system, and I love the Metal Slug series, and the Game Boy Advance version was such an unsung hero and such a wonderful addition to that series that I really think more people need to check it out because it's that good of a game. And finally, I checked out one of the rarest games on the Game Boy Advance, and something my friend Corey owns, and I was with him when he bought it for $5, and that's Ninja 5.0. Brand new, he bought it for $5, by the way, at a Sam's. It was in a bin, and they were clearancing out all their Game Boy Advance games, and he got Ninja 5.0. Next up, I guess we're going to call this one a handheld, because you kind of got to hold it up to your face, and that's the Virtual Boy. Emulates the Virtual Boy. Everything is bright red, it is decidedly hideous, but I'll be damned if this Wario Land game isn't fun. This is actually a really well-made game. I can see why I wouldn't want to have this right up on my eyes. I'm pretty sure it would just like scorch my retinas out of my skull, but like this isn't bad, right? This is actually pretty good. Hopping over now to the Game Gear, and the Game Gear emulates beautifully. I tried out Captain America and the Avengers, a game I've never played on the Game Gear before, and this one ran flawlessly, and I really like this version of the game. It was really cool to be able to play as Hawkeye and kind of go through and just do this neat little platforming beat-em-up game. It looks great. I also tried out Cool Spot, which is one that I have played in the past and I thought was fantastic, and just wanted to play it again because I love that game so much. And that's a wonderful licensed game on the Game Gear. It's just brilliantly made, and it's executed flawlessly. I think I've mentioned in the past that some of my favorite handhelds are the Neo-Geo Pocket and the Neo-Geo Pocket Color, and I have amazing emulators on here as well. With the Neo-Geo Pocket, I checked out Baseball Stars, and this is a great black and white version of a Baseball Stars game. It runs perfectly well. It plays great, it sounds great, it's really fun. And then on the Neo Geo Pocket Color, I checked out Rockman Battle and Fighter, and this is a slick little fighting game featuring Mega Man and some of the bosses from the Mega Man series. I've never played this one before. I actually didn't know it existed until I saw it in the list of games, and it's really fun. Now, before I get to the one that wasn't performing well, there's two more I want to look at, and one of them is the PSP. And I tried out Skyforce on the PSP, which is a shmup, and it works great. It looks and plays flawlessly. The sound is amazing in this game, and it just runs so beautifully well. And I also tried out Mega Man Powered Up on the PSP, which is one I've been curious about for a long time, and this is really cute. Like, it's an adorable version of Mega Man, and I appreciate that. Like, it does a lot really well, and it plays pretty well. I mean, it's a fairly interesting game, and I was really impressed by how well it ran. Next, I actually hopped over to the Nintendo DS, and I did not expect the emulation on this to work nearly as well as it does, but you get to control the stylus with the left thumbstick, and you play on side-by-side screens as opposed to up and down. And while I think that might be an issue if you need to play something where you're moving between different screens, like in one of the Kirby games, I know you descend from the top screen onto the bottom screen. I'm sure you can move around the screen configuration on here as well. And I really enjoyed this. Like, it runs really well, and DS emulation is another thing that can be fairly difficult, but this actually worked really well. So if we're going through all of these handhelds, and I'm telling you which ones are working beautifully well, when I get to the Atari Lynx, you would think that one probably works pretty well, right? No, this was actually the worst performing of the lot, and it's not that the games run poorly, the games run flawlessly well, it's just the default setting for the screen is so blown out and so up close that things are actually cut off on the screen. Like, you don't actually get the full play area on screen. Instead, you get this super blown out version of what you're supposed to be looking at. As you can see here in Rygar, things are actually cut off. Now, these games play great. They just look terrible on the screen. And this is something where I'm going to have to play with some settings. And I would love to get to the point where it actually like outputs correctly, because I think there's some neat games on the Lynx, and I'd love to be able to play them. It's just, in their current state, it just does not work for me. So that's going to do it for home consoles and handhelds, but how does it do with arcade emulation? I think you're going to be surprised. So with arcade emulation, we have things that are actually emulating straight up arcade machines, and then we have one I'm going to save for last that is specifically regarding homebrew arcade beat-em-ups. So starting things off, we're going with just the generic arcade emulator, which uses the Pac-Man font. And I play the Wild West Cowboys of Moo Mesa, which is based on a really obscure animated series, and you play as a cowboy, a cow male lawman, a cowman, a bull. You play as a cowboy that's also a sheriff, and you're a cow and you're a boy. Okay, it's fantastic. I love this game. It's silly, it's goofy, it does not take itself seriously whatsoever, and I just adore it. It is so much fun to play. It's a little bit Sunset Riders and a little bit Final Fight. It's just a great mix of gameplay. I just love it. Next up, we had Final Burn Neo, and I played 2 games here. I played Tapper, which is just so much fun. I always forget how much I love Tapper until I play it again, and while it's not the same as playing it in the arcade with that beer tap handle, it's still really fun to play at home. I also checked out The Simpsons, which I am just so happy to say runs flawlessly well. It is something where you're going to need to have multiple controllers plugged in to be able to choose the different characters, because by default, player 1 is going to be defaulting to Marge, so either get used to playing Marge or use the included USB hub and plug into one of the other ones to be able to play as somebody else. Next up, I checked out one called Atomiswave, and I'm not familiar with this one too much, but I checked out 2 games here. First up was the Rumblefish, which is a really unique game where each limb is individually animated, and it runs pretty well. Like, I expected this one to really tax things, and it actually ran fairly well. There's a little bit of slowdown present here and there, but it isn't so much to the point where it becomes an unenjoyable experience. It's still very fun to play. I also checked out Fist of the North Star, which is a beautiful fighting game with massive, massive character art and character sprites, and it's just, like, it's so much fun. Like, this is fantastic. I cannot wait to play this more because of how good it is. I checked out MAME next, and we looked at a game called Road of the Sword, which is a fun beat-em-up, and it kind of shook things up right away, because rather than going from left to right, I went from right to left, and that threw me off completely. But it's a really fun game. It looks to be a really neat story. It's not something I really know much about. I've never heard of it before. It was just the one I kind of chose at random, and it played and runs beautifully well. Now, where I expected things to fall apart was on the Sega Naomi. Now, I played Marvel vs. Capcom 2 on the Dreamcast, and I expected this to be kind of a repeat of that. So when I booted up MVC2, I didn't expect this to perform nearly as well as it did. And I'm so excited that I have a full arcade release of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 available to me to play anytime I want, and it runs nearly perfectly. I don't think it's at a full 60 frames per second. I do think it's probably in the mid-50s to upper 40s, but it runs well enough that I'm not upset. Like, I think it plays very well, and I think this is an absolutely wonderful inclusion, and I'm hoping to find more excellent games to emulate off of the Naomi hardware, because this is just such a treat to have. Now, the last one I want to show you is for homebrews, and that is for the Open Beats of Rage project. The ones I played first, I played the JLU game where I got to use Plastic Man, which is awesome, and you're bouncing around the city and fighting bad guys. It looks really cool, and it's really cute, and I'm very happy that it's here, because having Plastic Man to play as is awesome. And I also tried out the One Piece beat 'em up, which, much like the JLU one, these are homebrews, so some of them are going to vary in quality, but I think it's pretty awesome that people are taking a shot and making something ambitious and something that's really fun to play like this game is. Let's head over back to the chair now, and I will give you my final thoughts on the Super Console X. What's going on, everyone? Jay from the future here to steal from Tom and Lacey from Do You Nerd, and I kind of wanted to revisit how I'm feeling now about the Super Console X Pro. I initially did this recap, and I was kind of down on it, because there were some things that I just didn't feel like it did very well, but as I'm kind of reflecting on it and looking at how things are going, I realize how much more impressed with this I am than I'm not. You can do a lot with this machine right here for the cost. It might not be necessarily as customizable as something like a Raspberry Pi here. This is something I built here. And it's not like a Raspberry Pi is difficult to do. You can do this with zero technical skill. Trust me, I did it. You can do it too. But if you're looking for something that just out of the box is going to work and is going to offer you the ability to emulate a ton of different consoles with some flaws, but mostly flawlessly, this is a pretty good pickup. I'm pretty impressed by it. Does it have 62,000 plus games on it? No. It does have 62,000 plus pieces of software on it that you can launch from your emulators. Are all of them games? No. Some of them are things like screen tests, and that's not a game, but it is a piece of software on there. So by the loosest sense of the definition, yes, there are 62,000 things that you can launch on here and utilize. Is it necessarily worthwhile? If emulation isn't something that rubs you the wrong way, I think it's a good buy.
There will be a link down in the description. It's an affiliate link, and the affiliate links help the channel out monetarily. So if you're interested, go ahead and click that link down there. Otherwise, you can search for this at Amazon. Let me know in the comments down below what looked most impressive to you. I gotta be honest with you, it is really hard to top the Sega Naomi emulation. Hey, thanks to my patrons who you guys are seeing on screen right now. Without them, I wouldn't have been able to do this video. I truly appreciate their support. They paid for this, so thank you guys for doing that. If you dug this video, please check out the link up here right now where you can check out more of my hardware reviews. And until next time, remember to play more games, stay square, and take care. I'll talk to you soon.